Did you know that during that scene, Viggo Mortensen actually broke his toe when he kicked the
I know, Grandad!
Do not put this thing on. Hello guys, welcome back to another Rewind review. In this video what we're going to be doing is going all the way back to the year 2002 to take a look at Peter Jackson's second edition in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Two Towers. Based on the second novel in J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth trilogy, Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers sees Frodo and Sam edging closer to Mordor with the help of the ring's former owner, the shifty Gollum. Meanwhile, the divided fellowship makes a stand against Sauron's new ally, Saruman, and his hordes of Isengard. The movie was directed by Peter Jackson and adapted for screen by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, Stephen Sinclair and Peter Jackson. The film also features most of the returning cast, including Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, Sean Astin, Cate Blanchett, Billy Boyd, Christopher Lee, Dominic Monaghan, Liv Tyler, Hugo Weaving and John Rhys-Davids, alongside newcomers Andy Serkis, Bernard Hill, Miranda Otto, Carl Urban, David Wenham and Brad Dourif. If you saw my review for The Fellowship of the Ring, you're familiar with my history with these movies. For those of you who are just seeing this review for the first time, when it comes to the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a whole, I was a little bit young when these movies came out and it took me a long time to actually get around to actually seeing them, to the point where The Two Towers and Return of the King, it took me admittedly quite a few years before I was actually allowed to see them. Still amazed I was able to watch the first one considering all the stuff that happens in it. But when I was able to watch them for the first time, I wasn't able to watch the extended editions. I ended up just watching the theatrical cuts. So the version of the movie that I'm actually going to be talking about today is the extended cut, because this is admittedly the first time that I've actually seen this one all the way through. This version of the movie is clocking in just about 4 hours long, which is a very long time for a film. So I was really curious what it was that was added into this film, considering the theatrical cut is about 2 hours 40 thereabouts. And some of the new stuff added into this is sometimes it's just like small little details, like the elven rope, which is able to kind of like lasso it around things. It's able to untie itself so you can get it back, which I thought was actually quite a clever idea. Sam's also got a little box of salt that he carries around with him. There's a lot more scenes with Smeagol, there's a lot more scenes that are just sort of extended to really sort of flesh out the characters a little bit more. There is one scene that really did catch me off guard because I really wasn't expecting it, and fair warning, if you have not seen The Fellowship of the Ring before seeing this review, then I am going to be spoiling some of the events that do happen in that film. There is a flashback sequence in this movie where Sean Bean gets to return as Boromir, and the sequence kind of shows who he is. It sets up his relationship with his brother Faramir, as well as the dynamic that they have with their father. If you only watch the theatrical cut, none of this stuff is even really sort of addressed until Return of the King, and even then you only really sort of get an idea of how Faramir's relationship is with his father. You don't get to see anything else, so I really do appreciate this addition into this movie. And it's also nice just having Sean Bean back, and there's a lot of other sequences that really do help flesh out and develop this world so much more. Middle-earth is such a huge place, and I really do appreciate the amount of detail and attention that has been paid into this world. And because the Fellowship have kind of split up and gone their own separate ways, we're getting a very wide look at what Middle-earth is actually going through at this point in time. Because on one side of the story we have Frodo and Sam, who are continuing their journey to destroy the One Ring in Mordor, and along the way they end up encountering probably one of my favourite characters in this movie series. That's Gollum, played by Andy Serkis. Gollum is an absolutely brilliant character, and I really love Andy Serkis in this role. Andy Serkis is one of my favourite character actors on planet Earth, and this was the movie that introduced me to him. Yeah, even though it took a few years for me to actually properly watch this movie, that doesn't mean that I did see a few clips, and a lot of the scenes I did see did involve Gollum, and they did involve another big sequence as well, which I'll get onto in a little bit later on. But I just really love the character, and I think that the dynamic that he has with himself and the way that both of those personalities are portrayed is really clever. And I like how even just the camera movements really kind of reflect that, with the way that there's a sequence where he has a conversation with himself. He has a split personality where one side of him, the Gollum side, the side that's corrupted by the ring, the evil side of him, is quite menacing and kind of scary, and the camera's kind of positioned one way so you're seeing him from a certain angle. But then when Smeagol, who's the lighter, more friendlier side of him, is in control, the camera swings around to the other direction, so it's almost like you are getting a conversation between two characters. And the performance from Andy Serkis, the way that he's able to switch between those two characters on a dime, is amazing. And I really just say on a dime, a large part of the focus of this section of the story is to show what Frodo is going through, because the closer he's getting to Mordor, the more time that he is in possession of the ring, the more slowly it is starting to kind of corrupt him and take over. And with the extended edition, you see so much more of it, and it feels a lot more gradual, and I really do love that build up. I think Elijah Wood is brilliant as Frodo, and I think this is where his performance really does take off, and I think that he is brilliant once again in this role. But by far one of the most important characters in this movie trilogy is Sam, and you only really see a little glimpse of the character that he will ultimately become in the Fellowship of the Ring. In this one, this is his transition into the character that he ultimately becomes in Return of the King. I won't spoil Return of the King if you haven't seen it before, so all I'll say is what this movie does is it really does establish why he's a part of this story. Sean Astin's performance is incredible once again, and I think that the chemistry and the dynamic between Frodo and Sam is very believable, and I really do like how much it does get explored so much more in this. So that's the first story. The other part of the story is what's going on with the rest of the Fellowship. Merry and Pippin have both been kidnapped by the orcs and are being taken all the way to Saruman in Isengard, and Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli are in hot pursuit, and they are chasing them across Middle-earth. The Two Towers pretty much picks up more or less where the Fellowship of the Ring left off. I mean, admittedly, we do get the best intro sequence out of all the Middle-earth movies in this film, with Gandalf falling through the mines of Moria facing off against the Balrog. It's absolutely epic, and it is such an amazing way of starting this film. But then after that, it jumps straight into the aftermath of what's happened with the Fellowship of the Ring. And through this section of the story, everything kind of splits off into two different directions. So again, there's a lot going on in this one, but I feel like everything is given just enough time and attention that you don't feel like you're missing out on anything. I feel like everything is fleshed out enough. Because Merry and Pippin do ultimately escape from the orcs, and they encounter a character called Treebeard, and they meet the Ents. And Treebeard is my other favourite character in this movie. I absolutely love how he looks, how he talks, everything about him. And these were the sequences that I was allowed to watch. And this is the part of the story that kind of pays off a lot was built up in the first movie, with Saruman basically tearing down the trees and sort of turning the forest into basically like this iron workshop where he basically makes weapons and armour and all sorts for his armies. So that message of countryside versus industry is brought into this one, and that is kind of at the forefront of this part of the story. And I feel like that story is handled very well. I think that the messaging is really well executed, and even though those scenes can be a little bit slow, I feel like, well, that's kind of what the Ents do. It does lead up to a pretty amazing sequence with the Ents taking on Isengard, and I think it is genuinely an amazing sequence. And when it comes to Treebeard in this, I am genuinely amazed that it is John Rhys-Davies who plays this role as well, because John Rhys-Davies also plays Gimli. I was genuinely amazed finding that out for the first time, because for some reason it just never clicked that it was the same person, but as soon as I found out, I went, I can hear his voice now. But I do think that he is brilliant. I really do love Treebeard, and I love Merry and Pippin in these sequences. They do provide a lot of the more lighter moments. I really do love those characters, and I love the performances. I feel like these are the sequences that really do remind you that this is still a fantasy film at the end of the day. It's not a war movie. It's not incredibly dark and serious, which it can at times get in this one, because this is definitely a lot darker than the first film. And I feel like most of the sequences with Merry and Pippin, especially the one where they're drinking water and Pippin is growing a little bit taller than Merry, and the two of them start getting into a bit of a bicker about it, they are really good together. I really do love their connection, and I really love that even though, yeah, they are the more comedic characters, they do have their more serious moments, and when the serious stuff does happen, they are just as good as that as they are with the comedy. So that's the second story. The biggest story is what happens with Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli. Now, I'm going to need to address a very big spoiler in this one, even though it's in the trailers, it's in the posters, the movie's been out for 20 years, so I feel like most people will have seen this section of the movie. So if you haven't seen The Two Towers and you don't want to know it, I'd recommend you go and watch the film before coming back and watching the rest of this review. So what happens is, in their pursuit of Merry and Pippin, Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli stumble into the same forest that Merry and Pippin found themselves in, and they come face to face with Gandalf. It is treated as a big surprise, as a very big reveal, but it would be a lot bigger if it wasn't shown in any of the trailers and Gandalf wasn't on any of the posters, because you are led to believe that he has died, that he has fallen in the mines of Moria, and that's what that opening sequence is there to remind you of. But it is great having Gandalf back, and this time around he's Gandalf the White as opposed to Gandalf the Grey. Personal preference, I've always kind of preferred Gandalf the Grey because I feel like that is the more iconic look, because I've always sort of associated the white look with Saruman. But Gandalf's awesome no matter what. You know, thinking about it, there's a lot of movies today, especially when it comes to like Marvel and DC, where there's a lot of fake out deaths, and it's a big complaint among critics and fans that, oh, you never kill off any characters. These movies are just as guilty of it. Narratively, it does work within context of the story, and I do feel like they are executed very well, but you can't say that these movies don't have a lot of fake outs. Anyway, and from this point on, they head to Rohan to basically try and free the king who's been corrupted by Saruman, who's trying to extend his rule. This is where most of the newer characters get introduced, and most of these characters do ultimately get the chance to not only be in this film, but they get to stay through until the end. It is a really seamless integration. I really do think that every single character that is introduced in this movie does fit very well into the narrative, and I feel like they are introduced in a very natural way. That does go for the more larger-than-life characters like all the Ents, and I feel that when it comes to the performances from all these new characters, every single one of them are absolutely brilliant in each of their roles. They all feel very believable. I like that there is a lot of history, there is a lot of backstory with each of them, as there is with every single character in these movies. I really do love this section of the movie because of what it is able to explore and all the characters and dynamics that are introduced along the way. Theoden King is a brilliant character, and I think Bernard Hill is absolutely phenomenal in the role, and I love how they portray how he's being corrupted by Saruman, with the way that he's all sort of like aged and grey and all his eyes are all sort of pale and he just looks ill. And I love that moment when that is broken, and that moment where he starts changing back into who he really is. It is a genuinely amazing scene, and Bernard Hill's performance throughout that moment, as well as Miranda Otto as Erwin, they really do offer this much more sensitive side to these movies, because this is kind of like the toll of war, and that is a big part of this entire series from J.R.R. Tolkien himself, because he was very anti-war, and this is the movie that really does drive it home. This is the one where it really does show you just how brutal it can be, because Theoden has lost his son, and it really does show the impact of that on him, and I feel like that's where the performances of these characters really does come through, because they are absolutely phenomenal and they give some beautiful speeches. And even though I've seen this movie hundreds of times, I still do tear up a little bit where you see Theoden at his son's graveside, and just the moment where he just accepts what's happened. It really is a heartbreaking scene. I've got to be honest, when it comes to the speeches in this movie, even though I feel like Return of the King does have the best speeches of the entire trilogy, I do think there are some pretty amazing ones in this film. I feel like every single one of them are brilliant. They comment on things like war, they comment on things like hope, they comment on so much more. They are expertly delivered, they are absolute poetry. And one of the things that's manipulating Theoden throughout this first section of the movie is a character called Wormtongue. If you're somebody who's a Harry Potter fan, then that name might sound very familiar to Wormtail, who was a character in that movie. Was that inspired or ripped off in some way? It's very possible, and they do feel like very similar characters, and I feel like Wormtongue for me is probably the better character. It's a really slimy and manipulative character. I really do love how they portray him in this, because he really is quite creepy at times. And Brad Dourif, who plays him, like, I'm sorry if I'm saying his name wrong, he originally, for anyone who isn't aware, he was one of the original choices to play the Joker in the 1989 Batman movie, and I can completely see why in several sequences of him in this. I really think he is a brilliant actor, and what he brings to that role is absolutely phenomenal. I feel like every single person, including all those little minor roles, they are brilliant. Every single performance from everybody is brilliant. But it isn't all about all these new characters, because a large part of, especially the extended edition, which really does delve into this, is what's going on with Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli, because Legolas and Gimli, like, I don't feel like they're the most fleshed out characters. I feel like the performances from Orlando Bloom and John Rhys Davies, they are brilliant. I really do love both those characters, but I don't feel like they really sort of get enough to do in these movies. Whereas Aragorn in this film, this is where you start really learning about what his destiny ultimately is, and the extended edition really does delve into that, because you really do get to see a bit more of his history and his time with Arwen. I love how it really does flesh out their relationship a lot more, even though they are just flashback sequences, so we never actually see them interacting in the present day. But I do really love those sequences being added into this. But it is great that they actually do address something that I've always kind of had on my mind, because I am somebody who watched the Ralph Bakshi version of The Lord of the Rings, which is the animated one which came out in the 70s. That was my introduction to Lord of the Rings as far as I'm aware, and the one thing that always kind of confused me was that Aragorn always looks kind of old in those movies, like especially compared to Viggo Mortensen. So I did sort of wonder what the deal was there, and I actually do address that in this, because I was always under the impression that Aragorn was just human, but he's not, and because he isn't, he's actually in his 80s and he's looking really good. This is the kind of stuff that the extended edition is able to delve into so much more, and I do like those little details. Like, this movie could drag. It is a very long movie and it really does have moments where it really can drag, but it is so easy to sit through. I am amazed just how quickly it does fly by. It never drags, and there are sequences that are long, that do play out quite long, but it never feels that, and I really do appreciate that. It does help because you are invested in the characters and the story and the world building and everything, but it is genuine an achievement that at 4 hours long it is actually quite easy to sit through. But yeah, I think when it comes to Aragorn, his story and how that's been sort of built up a lot more in this movie, I really do love the direction that it is going, and I love how it is built up over time. As I said, when it comes to Legolas and Gimli, even though they're not the most developed characters, I do love their little rivalry that builds up over the course of this movie. Like, they didn't really get on very well in the first film. This time along, they are allies and they are slowly starting to become more friends, and I love their little like contests that they have whenever they go into battle, and they start like counting how many enemies they've got and they start comparing. It is just a fun little addition to this movie, but I really do appreciate those moments where the characters get to actually feel like people. I feel like that is something that really separates The Lord of the Rings from a lot of other fantasy epics out there, because this is something that really does prioritise humanity and emotions more than anything else. I really do love how each of these characters are depicted and how real they all feel. Even though this is a very fantastical setting and a very mad, unbelievable world at times, everything does feel very believable and very lived in. I really do love how it all works and knits together. That being said, even though Legolas doesn't get the most fleshed out, he gets probably the most iconic line of the entire movie, and anyone who's heard it has probably heard the song. It's one of the oldest videos on the internet. It is so iconic. I absolutely love it. It is absolute nostalgia blast. And it gets funnier when years later, when The Hobbit Desolation Smaug was being filmed, Orlando Bloom is there in costume on set, and he's actually got the video playing and he's singing along to it. So if you've never seen it before or listened to it, I'll put the link down in the description. There is one other very funny song that is remixed from this movie, and it's Potatoes by Sam.
Boil 'em, mash 'em, stick 'em in a stew. Boil 'em, mash 'em, stick 'em in a stew.
God, this is really bringing back some memories. I'll put a link to that one down below too. But ultimately what's happening with this storyline is everything is leading up to Helm's Deep, which is like this haven where all the people of Rohan evacuate to, and it's like this big trek across Middle Earth to get to this place where they think that they're going to be safe. And it's a really long build up. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background, like the Saruman building up his army and Wormtongue feeding him information. It really does take its time to get going, but when it does, we get one of the best on-screen battles ever put to film. Everything about it, from just the rain, the visuals, the editing style, the effects, everything about this sequence is phenomenal. It's a really big sequence, it's really intense, and it's absolutely brilliant. Up until the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones, this was one of my favourite on-screen battle sequences of all time, and even then it is a very close call. It is one of the best battles in all three movies. I think it is the best finale of these films as well, more purely for the stakes than anything else, because like, even though like obviously the battles in Return of the King are some of the biggest ever put to screen, and they are absolutely spectacular. The fact that this one is completely focused on these characters and they're just completely outnumbered, and just how tense it can get, it is so good. It's so well executed. I absolutely love it. The action in the Two Towers is a bit more sparing than it was in The Fellowship of the Ring, which does have some pretty big battles over the course of the movie. This one has a few smaller bursts throughout the film, and it really saves the biggest to last, and that is the Battle of Helm's Deep, as well as all the stuff going on in Isengard against the Ents at the same time. So it's a really good dynamic going on there. I also appreciate where it isn't one of those film sequences where they feel like they've got to cut between so many different things at once, where you start to get invested in something and then they have to cut away to something else, and then you start getting invested in that and you cut to something else. This does allow a lot of time to really sort of explore what's going on in each of these sequences in just the right amount of time, and only takes breaks at the opportune moments, and I really do appreciate that thought. All the action sequences across the Lord of the Rings trilogy are phenomenal. They are expertly handled. The ones in this one are some of my favourites, including the Warg battle. Admittedly, it does have a few of the more over the top sequences, like the fact that Legolas uses a shield and surfs down the set of stairs, just firing arrows. Why not? It's awesome. And during the Warg fight, there's a scene where Legolas actually jumps up onto his horse and he sort of swings around to jump on it, and that's where I sort of want to talk about the effects. Outside of a few moments here and there, like Legolas swinging around and things like that, the effects in this movie 20 years on still hold up and they still look really good. This does still rely on a lot of practical elements like the makeup and a lot of the costumes and things like that, but this is the one where they really sort of doubled down on the more effects heavy sequences, especially when it comes to the Ents with Treebeard and all the stuff in Isengard. They feel very believable. There is a lot of realistic textures and qualities that these characters do have because they are based on real trees, and that extends to Gollum, who is one of the earliest motion capture characters, especially like the ones that we have today. He's one of the earliest ones that we ever got, and he still looks incredible. The way that he interacts with the environment, with the characters, is phenomenal. There's a multitude of different ways that they went around trying to actually incorporate him into this movie, because they had a big sound stage where they do all the animations for him. They'd have Andy Serkis acting this stuff out. They had Andy Serkis on set so that he could provide eyeline for the characters and the actors, and one of the reasons why I feel like he still looks good to this day is because of one of the people who worked on how he looks. One of the key animators on this movie was actually a makeup artist, so he started off as a makeup artist, so he knew already how the makeup and skins and textures and everything would sort of interact within the environments that these characters are in. The only thing that he didn't know was how to use the software, so all they had to do was train him up how to use that, and then he could use his makeup abilities to his advantage. And that is genuinely why I think Gollum still looks as good as he does today. He is basically as close to a makeup effect as you could possibly get, and that does extend to all the more CG characters as well, as the Nazgul. They've got these gigantic dragon looking creatures which look incredible. They are big, they are scary, they're really well designed, and even the wargs as well. I think that every single CG character in this does still look good. Some people probably will say that they are a little bit dated, and I feel like when it comes to the wargs, that's a little bit 50-50, but I do still think they do look really good, and the way they interact with everything is still really good. They are so far beyond a lot of other movies that were coming out around the time, like The Mummy Returns was out I think the same year or the year before this one, and that does not hold up at all. So compared to that, honestly, it is miles better, and it is so deserving of all the awards that it got. And it's not just the CG characters as well, a lot of little camera trickery and things like that that are included in these movies. This is one where they really do sort of show off what it is that they can do when it comes to how the characters' heights are, because the Hobbits are tiny characters and they are interacting with some really big people and big things going on around them, and there's so many little things that they get away with in this movie that are really, really clever and so well integrated. Because there's one scene that to this day I still haven't got a clue how it is that they actually did it. It's probably the most simple thing that you can possibly do, but there's a scene where Merry and Pippin are racing away from the riders of Rohan and the orcs, and there's a scene where Merry and Pippin actually run through the legs of this horse, and it's just so quick and it's so simple how it's done, but it's amazing how it's done. It really does still hold up. It looks incredible 20 years on, and as I said, I feel like a lot of this is because it does rely still a lot on a lot more practical elements. A lot of the makeup and costume effects in this movie were carried over from the first film. A lot of the costumes are more or less the same. There's a lot more armour this time around. A lot of the characters are wearing different forms of armour, which look really good. They're very realistic. I love how they move and everything. All the chainmail, it is real, it is big, it is quite heavy, so a lot of these characters were wearing some pretty heavy armour, including the helmets, and I'm bringing this up because of one very specific scene. Odds are most Lord of the Rings fans are probably aware of this little bit of trivia. I had to make fun of it in the opening of this video. During that sequence where Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli are searching for Merry and Pippin and they're looking in this rubble of all these corpses of all these orcs, there is a scene where Viggo Mortensen kicks one of the orc helmets and he lets out this massive scream and falls to his knees, and the reason for it is because he broke his toe, because he did it that many times, but he kept going because he is so dedicated and he's an amazing actor. It is completely in character as well. I really do like that is the take that they did include in this, and it's just one of those bits of trivia that everybody will try and bring up at some point, so here you go. One thing that I did notice a lot more with the costumes in this movie is because it is continuing off from what the last movie was. A lot of the costumes do seem just a little bit more dirtier than they were in the first film. I really do appreciate that little attention to detail. I really do like little additions like that. And the makeup is a bit of a part of that, but especially like when it comes to Frodo and Sam, who's starting to get slightly muddier and dirtier the further and further through their journey they get. So I do like those little subtle details. And when it comes to the makeup, especially on the orcs and the elves and things like that, it is very good. It is very believable. Once again, the orcs look really scary. They are so much better than the CG ones from The Hobbit. I hand on heart believe that this is one of the reasons why the effects still hold up as well as they do today, because it isn't completely reliant on CG effects. It utilises practical elements as much as possible. It certainly helps that they do incorporate as many details as possible from the world of J.R.R. Tolkien, because it really does ground this movie. It does make it feel a lot more believable and a lot more fleshed out, because we get to explore a bit more of the different cultures, especially when it comes to like the elves, because we start to see why it is that they're leaving to the Undying Lands. We see a bit more of the Ents and how they communicate with each other, with the way that they just take forever to communicate. And we get to explore a lot more of Middle Earth this time around. We get to explore a lot of new locations that we haven't seen before. And like the first movie, there is a lot of history, there is a lot of backstory between them, and I really do think that everything is fleshed out really well. This really does feel like a very lived in world, and we are only getting to see just a small part of it, and I love that that is expanded so much more in this one. And when it comes to the music for this movie, Howard Shore returns and he provides once again an epic soundtrack. There's a lot of themes that are carried over from the first movie, but there's a lot of newer themes that are introduced, like the theme of Rohan and all the soldiers, and everything does feel very natural. Everything does feel like it is part of the same soundtrack. It does sound incredible. The Lord of the Rings trilogy has one of the best movie soundtracks of all time, and I think some of the ones in this one are so iconic. They are absolutely phenomenal. Overall, when it comes to the Two Towers, this movie is absolutely flawless. It is an absolutely gripping and investing story. It really expands on the story that we saw before as well as the characters. It's a brilliant middle chapter to the Middle Earth trilogy. As part of the overarching story from the three films, it is a really important chapter, but honestly it still stands out on its own. Every single thing about this movie, from the performances, the makeup, the effects, the story, the pacing, the cinematography, every single thing about this movie is absolutely phenomenal. I absolutely love this movie. 20 years on, it still holds up. It is still epic. It is still a fantastic film. It has some of my favourite moments from the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, and by far it is my favourite film of the three. So as you've probably guessed, my rating for The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, is a 10 out of 10. I absolutely love this movie. I was wondering if I was still going to love it as much as I did with the extended edition, with all the added stuff into it, and honestly it's just fleshed out and it's made it even better. It's always been my favourite of the three films, and honestly all the stuff that's added into it just makes it feel so much more complete. So if you haven't seen The Two Towers, I highly recommend that you check this one out. I honestly would recommend checking out the extended edition if you can. It is genuinely worth it, but I cannot stress enough that you do need to watch The Fellowship of the Ring before you watch this one, because of how much of the story it does carry over. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is a must-watch movie trilogy, and honestly, if you've never seen them before, give them a go. I know the run times can put people off, and that's more than fair, but honestly there is so much detail, there is so much care and attention and backstory and lore that is addressed in these movies, it is absolutely worth it. So that is pretty much everything I've got to say for today's episode. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you've seen The Two Towers, let me know in the comments what you think about it and which movie is your favourite in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Keep an eye out for more rewinds in the future, including Return of the King, which will be out this year. And also, if you have any suggestions for any rewinds you'd like me to do in the future, let me know down in the comments. Dare I wear the ring one more time? Yes, thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.